Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. There we go. All right. My name is Brent Adamson. As always, I am delighted to be with you here today at Dreamforce 16. This is about the 6th year we've been invited to come share with you our latest findings from CEB, and I'm excited to do that over the next 45 minutes or so. Now, some of you may not be familiar with CEB, formerly known as the Corporate Executive Board. However, some of you may be familiar with the work that we've published in the Challenger Sale, the Challenger Customer. The heart and soul of that work is the result of just a huge amount of work that we've done at CEB over the last now about almost 8 or 9 years across hundreds of thousands of sales professionals trying to understand what sets the very best apart. And I think many of you will know the punchline to that story. It's up here on the screen. Is in studying those hundreds of thousands of sales professionals, one of the things that we surprisingly found is that virtually every sales professional has this tendency to fall into one of 5 distinct profiles: the hard worker, the challenger, the relationship builder, the lone wolf, and the problem solver. And it was not until we found those 5 profiles and then compared them to actual sales performance that we found something that's so interesting that set us on a journey for the better part of 10 years now, which is we found that this challenger sales professional is head and shoulders performing above everyone else, is far more likely to be a star performer. And equally interesting, the relationship builder is least likely to be a star performer. Now, when you dig into this, and this is not the topic for today, but just to kind of set us up for where we want to go next, but when you dig into what this challenger rep is doing and doing so differently, it boils down to sort of 3 things. It's their ability to teach, tailor, and take control. And for many years, that's been the heart and soul of the story that we've shared with you here on these stages and around the world through publications and books and magazines and our memberships around teach, tailor, take control. The ability of that challenger rep to teach customers something new, not about the world, not about their product or solution, but to teach the customer something new about their business, the customer's business. Show them a new way to compete, save money, make money in ways they themselves hadn't fully understood despite all of the learning that they've done on their own. To do that in a tailored fashion. And tailoring for consensus was really the subject of last year's presentation here at Dreamforce, where we talked about all of the different people inside the customer organization have to come together to reach a common decision on what they want to do. And it's really up to the sales professional, the challenger rep, to make sure that they're tailoring their sales approach, not just to each individual stakeholder, but to that broader collective vision that they're trying to create across those stakeholders. Today I want to talk about the third of these 3, and talk a little bit more about take control. Because, to be honest, there's kind of a couple things about this slide I would share with you. The first thing I would share with you is this. Again, over those 10 years or so, we've been incredibly busy. At CEB, not only do we do a heck of a lot of research, which is part of the business that I sit in, but our implementation teams and our membership teams have been out helping hundreds of companies all over the world implement these ideas. And what's neat is now that we're several years in, we can point to results that are mind-boggling in terms of big enterprises, large companies, small companies, making huge progress through the training that we offer, through the tools that we're providing, the work that we've collaboratively all done to rewrite sales processes, to rebuild content, to redesign sales coaching. It's a fascinating and exciting journey that we've all been on together. But from a research perspective, the one thing I would tell you is that at our heart and soul at CEB, our core DNA has always been to learn the new thing, to ask the questions no one thought to ask. And what's so interesting / frustrating about being in the research business is every time you go out and you study a really big, complex topic like sales performance or marketing performance, inevitably, you always find 2 things. The first thing you find is answers, which is great. And that's what we've been sharing with you for the last couple of years. That's what we've been helping companies implement around the world. But the second thing you find is what? More questions. It's so frustrating because every time we get answers, we get more questions. And one of the questions we've gotten off of this slide, I think rightly so, is what exactly does take control mean? And we've spent some time in the past talking about negotiation techniques and making sure that you're bringing conversations back to value. But what does take control mean today? Particularly in a world where it seems like if anyone's got control, it is the customer. If you think about the world that we live in today, the world that we're all trying to survive and thrive in commercially today, it is a world where customers are more empowered than ever before to learn on their own, to control and dictate the rhythm of the purchase process in ways that seem to always force us into a really deep commodity trap. And that's what we wanted to study this year in significantly more depth. In fact, I will tell you, most of our work over the last 3 years, most of our most productive research hasn't been on selling or marketing, although we're still working there too. It's been on buying and trying to understand the dynamics of B2B customer buying behavior and how they impact challenger reps and their ability to succeed. And just to show you what I mean, let's think about the world that we live in today. This slide will look, not the slide per se, but the story of the slide will look, I think, very familiar. When you think about sort of the world that we all live in today, that we sell in today, that we market in today, that we buy in today, it is a changing world. And it's a world that's changing pretty dramatically across 3 specific dimensions: information, options, and people. And if you had to think of just one word to describe each one of those dimensions and what they have in common, it is the word more. We live in a world today where there's just more information available to our customers. Customers now can learn on their own, and a widely cited statistic that we've been sharing with you for the better part of several years is one of the things we know is that customers and their ability to learn on their own, to go out and do their own research, to gather their own information means that they can delay interaction with a sales organization significantly, to a significantly greater degree than they ever could in the past. One of the things we know is that customers on average are a full 57% of the way through a purchase process prior to picking up the phone or reaching out to a supplier sales rep to get their input on whatever it is that they're doing. They also have more options. We live in a world today where it's not just information that's available, but the options are available, whether it's fast followers, whether it's competition from other parts of the world, whether it's converging technologies, where it's the fact that everything today has an IT component to it one way or another. You know, you got mobile, you got digital. Somehow, some way today, customers have more options that they can consider to get a solution to address a challenge in their organization than they've ever had in the past. And of course, there's more people involved in that purchase today too. As the solutions they're looking to buy continue to expand in both in size and scope, and for that matter in expense, it naturally brings in more people across that customer organization to make to figure out what they want to do. Now, think about how that all plays out. And we all kind of know how that plays out in our own organization, right? When you think about sort of what that looks like, what it feels like, is it leads to all sorts of new demands from customers on our supplier organizations. In a world of more information and more options and more people, what happens, as you see over on the right, is we now live in a world where customers have become incredibly demanding. And we've got to figure out how do we navigate those very complex demands that rise from the world there on the left. So customers, because there's so much information out there, continue to demand even more information because they know it's available. We need the data on this. We need the ROI on this. We want customer testimonials. We want the fact sheets. We want the research. Can you show me a white paper on this? Across a ranging set of evolving needs. As customers learn more across that purchase process, they go this way, then they kind of go that way. And actually what we really need is more of this. Hey, now that we did some research, can your solution also do that? Which leads to alternate requests and diverse requests across all those different people. Sometimes it seems like we got the customer buttoned down and we know exactly what they want, and then a new stakeholder comes into the purchase and they want actually that solution to do something else altogether. Now we got to figure that out too. And so what happens is that purchase process, that sales process, which used to feel at least relatively linear, is today more of just an incredibly complex zig and then zag. One of the heads of sales we work with very closely says, my sales process today, it does that. It zigs, then it zags, then it stops, then it restarts, then it moves back, and then it goes forward. It is so incredibly complicated because our customers in this world, they simply want more. More information, more options across more people. In fact, we have a name for this world. We simply call it the world of more. And trying to figure out how to survive and thrive as a supplier, a B2B supplier, when we sell complex solutions in the world of more is really hard. How do you win in the world of more when it seems like your customers have got all the power to demand all of that information, all those options, all those price concessions across all those people just to get a deal done? Well, there's a solution. And when we go out and we talk to heads of sales around the world about how do they survive and thrive in the world of more, they kind of tell us the same thing. They say, well, we've got a strategy for the world of more. If the problem is a world of more problem, we've got a world of more solution. We're going to find a way to do anything and everything we can to give our customers exactly what they want. If they want more content and more information, what are we going to do? We're going to give them more information. You want a white paper? I'll give you a white paper. You want a cost analysis? I will give you a cost analysis. If you want information across 3 different customer testimonials, I will be on the phone and have those to you by the end of the day. Whatever content I need, I'm going to make it happen. And by the way, that is keeping marketing organizations busy like you wouldn't believe. The production of all of that content in response to all of those demands for more has just, it's been almost overwhelming. At the same time, if customers are asking for more options, yeah, but can your solution do this? We love what you guys can do, but could it also do that? Can it do mobile? What about an app? Can I do this in Asia? How does it work there? It's like, so then your sales rep comes back and says they want it in Asia, and your whole team's going, oh, okay, we got to deploy it in Asia. How do we do it? Put it on mobile app, we're good to go. And you got the whole team running around in circles figuring out how do we put all these different options together and broaden our offerings so that we can meet all of those expanding customer demands. We're all on that journey, particularly if you're sort of mid-market and growing on an M&A quest to bring in all of these other companies and put the portfolio together to offer what one company I know well called the continuum. The continuum was the fact is like, I can take all of those different little companies that we have cobbled together across the last 5 years and show you a beautiful solution where 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. The trouble is, no one knew how to sell it. But it was really complicated, but it was all done in response to this, to customers' demands for more. And that also means we've got to be more flexible than ever before. Somehow we've got to introduce a high level of flexibility into our organization. So if customers zig, we'll zig too. If they zag, we're right there with them. Every way they go, we're right there with them to make sure that we're offering whatever they ask for. If their needs change, you know what's going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to change our offering. And we're going to do it faster and more nimbly and more agile than anyone else. In the world of more, that's a world of more solution. There's only one real problem with that slide. What is that? It's really, really hard. This is really hard to do, and it's expensive. But what's interesting is virtually every one of us has some sort of mandate inside our organization to do something that looks and feels like this. So let's show of hands in this room. How many of you have a mandate, usually going all the way up to the CEO, to do everything and anything we can as an organization to focus on the customer experience? That's at least 80, 90% of you in this room. Because we've all got that same mandate. We've got to put the customer at the center of everything that we do. We've got to listen to their demands. We've got to be as responsive as we possibly can to all those demands. And the solution here is to be as responsive and as nimble and as agile as we can to be the one that wins in that world. Because in a world where it's so hard to differentiate on anything else, at least we can differentiate on our responsiveness. We are the agile company. Whatever a customer wants, we're there to give it to them. And what's interesting is not only CEOs argue that that's the right thing to do, sales reps do too. In fact, we went out and we surveyed sales professionals around the world, about 2,000 of them, and we asked them, what is your key? We asked them essentially, to what degree do you agree or disagree with the following strategies in engaging with your customers? And here's what we found. 68% of sales reps that we surveyed, this is across industries, across geographies, all B2B. 68% of sales professionals we surveyed told us that more information helps our customers make better decisions. That's over 2/3 of sales reps said, if our customers are asking for more information, what do we need to do? We need to give them more information. By the way, that usually comes back to marketing as a request for that thing I need next week, otherwise this deal is going to fall apart. 79%, that's virtually 80% of sales reps tell us, I am very flexible to customer needs and opinions throughout the sale. Whatever they do, I want to be there right there with them. What's so interesting, by the way, about the second statistic here is sales reps told us they will make sure that they stay flexible to customers' needs even when they don't agree with what the customer even wants in the first place. The more important thing is to be as responsive as I possibly can, to make sure that I'm perceived as a partner, as a trusted advisor, so that when they ask, I can say yes. In fact, take a look at this last one. 86%, now I'm a liberal arts guy, not a math guy, so I round up, so that's virtually all of them in my book. But 86% of sales reps told us that helping customers consider all options and alternatives is very important. And you know, the mentality here is it's almost inescapable, isn't it, right? In a world where it seems where a customer have got all the power and they've got all in their hands and they're asking for all the information, all the options, we got to be the one to be there to be part of that conversation. After all, either with us or without us, they're going to consider all their options. So I might as well be part of that conversation rather than a victim of that conversation. But to do this at scale, to do this in a sustainable level, to do this across your entire business is not only really hard, it's really expensive. And very few reps can play that game on a sustainable level. And just think about all the different specialists and all the different content and all the different research and all the different options that you've got to cobble together to win at this game. One of the heads of sales we know really well, he said, I got a name for this. And I said, what's that? And he said, we call this the school bus sale. And I said, what's the school bus sale? And he said, the school bus sale is a sale where it takes so many subject matter experts to get the conversation done that you have to rent a school bus to go visit the customer to put them all on the bus. And it's interesting because I've run this slide at meetings all over the world with hundreds and hundreds of sales leaders as part of our membership program. And we always have the same conversation on the slide, which is just how unsustainable this particular strategy is. So the question is, how do we win in the world of more if this particular method isn't actually going to get across the finish line on anything more than an ad hoc basis? Well, the answer is actually really interesting. But to understand the answer, and that's what I want to spend the balance of our time today talking about, is how do you win in this kind of world when that's not going to get us there? But to understand the answer that we found through all of our research it turns out we actually have to not dig deeper into selling, we have to dig deeper into buying. And to truly understand what it feels like not to sell solutions today, but what it feels like to buy them. Because the way it feels to buy them is actually not what we thought. One of the things that's really interesting about CEB and the fact that we're a research organization, we learn right along with you guys. The stuff we know today is radically different sometimes than what we knew 5 years ago. And one of the things that we learned today that we had never fully appreciated is that maybe customers aren't nearly as empowered as we thought they were. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to do a thought exercise with you. This is a fun thought exercise. I've done this all over the world with thousands of people. So what I want to do, and this is going to take some, wait for it, this is going to take some empathy. You guys ready for this? All right, so here's what I need you to do. I need you for just a moment to take your sales and marketing hats off. And I want you to put your buying hat on. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about in your own organization, your own experience inside your company, and I want you to think across the last 12 to 18 months and the purchase of a large-scale B2B solution in your own company. So maybe it was a marketing automation platform. Maybe it was a CRM system. Maybe it was a lead management system. Maybe it was some sort of sales tool for this particular audience. I want you to think about that purchase. Think about some of the questions you see up on the screen there. Who was involved in that decision? Think about all of the different people that had to sign off, that had to provide input into what that decision was. I want you to think about that process. Where'd you run aground? What was difficult about it? What were the challenges you faced? What were the questions you had? And then I want you to ask a really interesting question. How did you feel about that entire purchase journey? How did it feel like to make that purchase with your colleagues in your own organization? You all there now? Did I paint the picture for you? Now here's an interesting question. Now if I were to ask you, if you were to choose one word, one adjective, to describe that entire purchase experience inside your organization, what would that word be? Laborious. Painful. Scary. Cluster. I've heard that one a lot. Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone else want to use the F word? Fun. By the way, did you notice the pattern, right? Long, hard, time-consuming, frustrating, awful. One person in Chicago said, I just never want to do that again. And she was serious. I mean, you could see the pain in her eyes. It was like the most visceral comment I've heard all year. I never want to do that again. By the way, what do you do when the first thing your customer thinks about a purchase of your solution, the first thing they think is, I never want to do that again? What does that mean for your business? One member in Washington, we said, so pick the one word, the one adjective, and he said, landmine. And I looked at him and said, that's not an adjective. And he said, landmine-ish. And he wasn't kidding. So you know what? That became my word for the last year. For the last year, my word of the year has been landmine-ish. Because landmine-ish, I think, in many ways is the perfect word to describe the purchase journey that virtually every one of us goes on in our organization just to buy something. It's really hard. It's awful. It's frustrating. It's time-consuming. But here's a really interesting question. Let's take it one step further now. Now I want you to continue to think about that purchase experience in your own organization and ask yourself the following question. How much of that time, how much of that frustration, how much of that pain, how much of that landmine-ishness was the result of the specific supplier you were buying from, and how much of it was just the result of your own company getting in its own way? For most of us, the answer is what? It's our own company just getting in its own way. Much of the pain, much of the time, much of the frustration has absolutely nothing to do with selling and everything to do with buying. It's just really hard to buy today. And if you think about the broader scope, isn't it like, boy, it's really hard to work with company A and how they sell, because much of that pain happens long before you ever engage that company in the purchase at all. In fact, if we were to think about the broader purchase journey, let's think about, let's map the purchase journey. And many of us are involved in purchase journey mapping in our own organizations. More on that in just a second. But let's think about this very broadly, about the entire journey that a customer has to go on just to make a B2B purchase. And you start, and there's all sorts of questions. Each of those questions represents a potential landmine. So over there on the left, we got to figure out, what is the problem? Do we have a problem? Is that problem worth solving? Is that problem number 5 on a list of 3 things we can afford to do, or number 3 on a list of 5 things we can afford to do? Should we do something about it? Once we figure out whether or not we should address that problem, then we've got to ask, what's the solution? There's all sorts of different ways we might solve that same problem. We got to get agreement on that. We got to make sure that we vet the different solutions. We got to figure out how applicable they are. Can they integrate with what we've done already? But by the time we figure that out, only then towards the end are we ready to talk about which supplier is best able to provide that solution. And along the way, there's all sorts of subsidiary questions, each and every single one of them representing a landmine that we've got to figure out and navigate and anticipate just to make it to the next step. What's the priority? Who's involved? Which criteria? How much should we spend? Always an easy thing to decide. That's a really tough journey to go down. And what's so interesting is how much of that purchase journey has nothing to do with a supplier at all. And what's so interesting is I mentioned before, there's organizations that through our Marketing Leadership Council, we work with marketers all over the world. Marketers would tell you the same thing. We've spent the better part of the last 4 or 5 years mapping the customer's purchase journey. And when they say that, I always got this map in the back of my head, and they say, well, tell me about your purchase journey. They'll say it's 4 stages. I said, really, what are your 4 stages? They'll say, well, it's awareness, consideration, preference, and purchase. And that's how most of us map the current purchase journey right now with our customers. Awareness, consideration, preference, and purchase. But stop and think about those 4 steps in a purchase journey and ask yourself, awareness of whom? Of us, the supplier. Preference, consideration of whom? Consideration of us, the supplier. Preference for whom? Of us, the supplier. That's not actually this. When you're mapping awareness, consideration, preference, purchase, that is not the purchase journey, that is the purchase from us journey. And as a result, the scope of what you're trying to solve there is far too limited relative to the actual challenges that your customers face. Because every single one of those landmines is a potential loss for you. How many deals have we lost as a supplier before we knew they were ever in play to begin with because they fell off the purchase journey long before we ever got onto the radar screen? And you stop and think about, well, that's actually really hard. That doesn't feel like empowered at all, does it? That actually feels like something else. It kind of feels like customers aren't empowered so much as they are overwhelmed. And if you stop and ask yourself, well, why? Why do we live in a world today where customers suddenly become so overwhelmed? What happened? Well, what happened is actually there's a reason for this. You can actually root cause this. And when you go back and you root cause this and you think about what's actually happened in the world today to lead us to a situation where customers are less empowered than they are overwhelmed, what you find out is it's a story of information, people, and options. But it's not just a story of more information, more options, more people, but it's a story of too much information, too many options, and too many people. Because this is the world that we live in today. And what's interesting is that we can go well beyond research at CEB into some really powerful research done by behavioral psychologists, behavioral economists, who've done really fascinating work in this world to understand just what's going on psychologically in a world of too much information, too many options, and too many people. And just briefly, I'll tell you a little bit of what they found. So you start up with too much information up in the top left. What's interesting, again, because what marks today's reality for buying and selling is, yes, we live in a world of information, but it's a world of abundant information. There is more information in the world today than ever before. And what do we as marketers in particular do every day? We pump in more information. We're all producing more content. Content is king! And if we can produce more content, it's going to allow us to win. So we just produce more white papers, more infographics, and more videos, and we just dump it out there with everybody else's content. And now the customer's got to navigate all that. And what happens in a world of abundant information? What happens, psychologists study this, is actually quite fascinating. So let's say you want to figure out something. You want to make a purchase. Maybe it's a purchase of something you've never made before. So the first thing you do is you say, well, I want to do a little research. What is research? You go to your online and you use your favorite search engine and you search it, right? Now, what happens in a world of abundant information is not only are you going to find information when you do research, you're going to find more information than you ever possibly could have imagined. Have you guys done this before? I recently wanted to buy my daughter, I have a younger daughter, I wanted to buy her a telescope for the holidays, right? And so I went to Amazon and put in telescope, and 5 hours later, you know what I was doing? I was still researching telescopes at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because this is what happens. What happens is when you find more information than you expected, psychologists have determined that that's a trigger in your mind to tell you, wow, this decision's actually more important than I realized because there's more information out there than I had anticipated. You know what I better do? I better do what? More research. And when I go do more research, what I'm going to find? More information. And on it goes. And this is, in fact, the paralysis of analysis. You wind up in this death spiral of learning, and you never can fully escape because you always think there's one more thing to do. And last time I tried to buy a car, it took me 6 months because I just couldn't pull the trigger. And this is what happens in the world of too much information. At the same time, too many options up in the top right. For those of you who have not read it, there's a book by a guy named Barry Schwartz, who spoke at our sales and marketing conference last year as our keynote speaker. He wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice. And the paradox of choice is completely mind-blowing. It is so fascinating. And what Barry's fundamental premise is that actually having a lot of choice isn't necessarily a good thing. Sometimes it, in fact, can be a bad thing, or at least it can be very frustrating. Because in a world where you have lots and lots of choices, what do you naturally do? You compare them. And as you compare them, you do exactly what anyone might do, is you start thinking about the trade-offs. I like a little bit of option A, but you know what? I kind of like a little bit of option B. Ooh, there's an option C. I like this one part of option C. That's awesome. But at the end of the day, you got to choose one of them. But now you've spent all the time figuring out what's good and bad about each one of those options relative to the other ones, but you still have to choose one of the three, because you can't have option A, B, C, because that doesn't exist. I've got to choose option A, B, or C. And what Barry has demonstrated, and a lot of other researchers have too, is when you choose one of those options, no matter which one it is, you're not thinking so much about the great stuff of the option you chose, you're thinking about all the great stuff of the option you didn't choose. And so you're stuck in this world of kind of malaise. This is, by the way, when you go to one of those restaurants, there's a menu that's 50 pages long, you never really leave satisfied, because you're always wondering about the thing you didn't order, right? Now, too many people at the bottom, this one we spent a lot of time last year talking about, is the fact that we know that there are more people involved in a purchase decision today than ever before. Last year we talked about 5.4. Our statistics this year tell us in just 18 months it's gone up about 25%. On average, we find now there's about 6.8 people involved in a purchase decision inside a customer organization. That's dramatic, and that's scary. But what's interesting is, we've talked about in the past, it's not so much a numbers problem, it's a diversity problem. As each one of those individual stakeholders across the customer organization represents a different perspective, a different function, a different set of priorities, a different agenda. You got someone from legal, you got someone from procurement, you got someone from IT, you got someone from finance. Each one of them comes to the table with a different set of priorities that they're trying to solve for in their organization. So what happens when that group comes together to deliberate on a decision, they've got to find common ground. Now, as the group becomes bigger and more diverse, how likely are they to find common ground? Less and less likely. So they settle. They settle for what we've come to call the lowest common denominator of where they're most likely to agree. And where is a very diverse group most likely to agree? On things like study it more, save money, reduce disruption. These are the kinds of things that drive us as suppliers crazy, because these are our customers buying the smallest possible solution they can to get everyone to agree. But think about it from a customer's perspective. Nobody feels good about that solution either, right? Think about the solution that you guys bought when we went through the thought exercise just a minute ago. It's like, yeah, we bought this thing, but I kind of had to give in here and someone else had to give in. Nobody's happy. Y'all just kind of surrendered and said, fine, let's just get this over. Let's just buy something. But think about where we just landed now. I've got paralysis at the top left, malaise at the top right, and surrender at the bottom. This is what it feels like to buy today. This is why when we ask thousands of people all over the world to pick one word to describe their purchase experience, it is almost always negative. And the penalties we all pay for this are potentially huge. Let me show you a couple penalties we pay for this. It's really kind of dramatic. The first penalty we pay, and customers pay, is time. In a world of too much information, too many options, and too many people, it just takes so much time to get a purchase decision across the finish line. And how many of them wipe out before they ever get there? One of the things we know from surveying thousands of customers, these are individual stakeholders involved in a B2B purchase, and we asked them a whole series of questions about their buying experience as part of a survey we did about a year and a half ago. And one of the things we were really interested in was just the time it took to make the purchase relative to the amount of time they thought it would take to make the purchase. And what was interesting is that virtually all of the respondents, like 98.5, virtually every single respondent told us that the purchase took significantly longer than they originally thought it would. And when we asked them how much longer, we got this. Virtually in this case, about 90% of the respondents told us that the purchase took about twice as long as anticipated. But think about that practically speaking. Think about, if you think a purchase is going to take you about 3 months, it's going to take you 6. If you thought that purchase was going to last 6 months, it took you a year. If you thought it was going to last a year to figure that out, it took you 2. And think about how you feel at the end of that 2 years. This is a really interesting question. It's like we're so focused, I think, sometimes around the mechanics of buying and the mechanics of selling, we don't think about so much the emotion of buying. But what does it feel like to buy a solution? What does it feel like to buy a solution in that world right there? And we actually know, because it's the second thing, the other penalty that we place, because the cycle times and all this stuff, it's not just the cycle times. We talk about sales cycle times going up. Now we know that buying cycle times are going up too, and dramatically. By the way, let me do there's one other note, and we'll talk about this in just a second. There's one other thought. You know what else we found is not on the slide, but it's an interesting statistic for those of you guys who want it. The other thing that we found here is that the amount of time that customers told us, the amount of time it took in the purchase before they felt ready to pick up the phone and call a supplier sales rep took as long as they thought the entire purchase was going to last itself. The amount of time it took in the purchase before they felt ready to call a supplier sales rep, that amount of time took as long as they originally thought the entire purchase was going to last. What does that tell you? That much of this time, much of that pain, again, has nothing to do with the supplier at all. And when you run through that experience, you wind up here. You wind up in a really dramatic place. This is something we had never thought to study before at the Sales Leadership Council, which is our sales practice at CEB. But we did as part of this work, which is we wanted to understand not just how long does it take or what are some of the frustrations you face, what are the landmines you might fall into, but what does it feel like when it's all done? So we studied something called purchase regret. Purchase regret is simply just a measure, and I can break this down offline for anyone who wants to get into the details. We do this with our members. We can really break this down in a lot of detail. We can sort of help you think about what this looks like for your own customers. But nonetheless, purchase regret is a metric that we created off a series of questions we asked in our surveys around basically how you feel about the thing you ultimately bought. Are you excited about it? Does it do what you anticipated? Did you settle for something smaller? Those kinds of things. And what we found is, what we did is we took that measure of purchase regret and we compared it to a score for overwhelmedness. So we also had a series of questions in our surveys that allowed us to create essentially an overwhelmedness score for anyone in a particular purchase. And when you map those two together, you get this line graph. And not surprisingly, what you find is the more overwhelmed you are as part of a purchase, the more likely you are to regret whatever it is that you bought. That's dramatic. Let me say that again, because actually I don't want that to just go flying by. Hey, at CEB, they got a line graph. That's what they always have, right? But it's like, stop and think about that for a second. The more overwhelmed you feel as part of a purchase, the more likely you are to regret whatever it is that you bought. If that buying process is hard, you are not happy with the thing that you bought. Now remember, I asked you, what's the one word you choose to describe your buying experience? And you all picked really negative words. Stop and think about where that gets us. It gets us to a pretty dark place. Now remember, what's so interesting about this is much of what drives that overwhelmedness has nothing to do with the supplier at all. And yet, there I am at the end of that process regretting the thing that I bought, which doesn't seem really fair, does it? That I would regret the solution I bought from the supplier even if they weren't the cause of the pain in the purchase in the first place. And yet, that's exactly what we found. In fact, let me put some data behind this. Here's some of the real price that we pay as suppliers for the customer's difficulty to buy. There's two bar charts in the slide. Let's start with the one on the left. The one on the left is a measure of customer loyalty for those customers in a low regret purchase versus a high regret purchase. And what we find is for those customers who reported making it through a high regret purchase where they were highly overwhelmed and therefore what we find is that the customer loyalty goes down by about 14%. In other words, when customers regret what they bought, even if you weren't the cause of that regret, you nonetheless, as a supplier, pay the price in actual customer loyalty. And take a look what happens on the right. On the bar chart over on the right, this is a measure of what we call negative customer advocacy, which goes up by a full 53% in high regret situations. In other words, your customers are 53% more likely to engage in negative customer advocacy if they regret what they bought. Now, what is negative customer advocacy? To be super clear here, negative customer advocacy is not simply, I will not recommend you. It's not like a low NPS score. Negative customer advocacy is, I will go out of my way to actively speak against your solution among my colleagues. And if I regret whatever it is that I bought, I'm going to do that. Even if that company wasn't the source of the problem. It doesn't seem fair. And yet, if you play this out in your own mind, it actually makes a ton of sense. I'll never forget, I was in London with our members there, and the chief sales officer in the front row, and he had just bought a CRM system. And he said, Brent, he said, it took us 2 years to buy this CRM system. He said it was the most awful experience of my recent professional career. All the different people in all the different regions and all the different functions, everyone had an opinion. We had to integrate. It's like every problem you can name, he named it. He says, we finally got there and we bought it. And he says, to be totally fair to the supplier who sold it to us, the system does exactly what they said it would. It performs exactly to spec. And he says, nonetheless, every single time I sit down to use that system, I hate it. I hate it because it takes me back to those 2 years of misery. One of our friends in the financial services industry is a head of sales there. He said, we have a name for this in our company. He said, what's that? He said, we call this the winner's curse. The winner's curse. Now, the bummer here is we actually have to think about this stuff. Now, from a sales perspective, you look at this from a sales perspective, we never even thought to look at this in the past because, again, in the Sales Leadership Council CB, we're about selling. We're about closing deals, right? We're about win rate. I don't care how customers feel. I just want to see some green. But it turns out, in the world of overwhelmed customers, a win isn't always a win, isn't always a win. It turns out we actually have to stop and think about how our customers felt about that win too. Because if they feel bad, we're ultimately going to pay a bigger price than we ever anticipated. If not today, then surely tomorrow. And you stop and think, well, what in the world is the solution to this? What do we do about this? Because a thing that we can sum up from this is that customers today, if they're not empowered but actually overwhelmed, and we as suppliers are paying a price for their pain, we've got to find a solution for it, even if we're not the cause. So what is a solution for that kind of difficulty? The answer is we have got to find a way to take a difficult purchase and make it easier. This becomes one of the key mandates of all of us as B2B suppliers, is to ease the burden on our customers as they go through that entire purchase journey, much of that journey which has nothing to do with us. In fact, what you see here is a bar chart. It's a measure of what we call the likelihood of making a high-quality sale. And what we found is for those suppliers, for those customers who report a high level of purchase ease, the supplier selling to them is 62% more likely to win a high-quality sale. A high-quality sale is a sale where the customer doesn't settle for the smaller offering but buys the bigger solution at the higher margin. And what's interesting here is, again, by the way, we've never seen that big of a delta in any of our data. We've studied high-quality sale metrics for the better part of 5 years now. This is by far the biggest inflection, the biggest impact on high-quality sale we found in any of our research is making the purchase easier. By making the purchase easier for the customer, we as a supplier are 62% more likely to win a high-quality sale. Now, that's bar charts. I like pictures. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I like simple things. By the way, do you guys all know what the N on the Nebraska helmet stands for? Does anyone know? It stands for knowledge. That's right. We're very proud of that in Nebraska. Yeah, buddy. Go Big Red. All right. So let me show you a big picture of this. Here's the big picture. Anything and everything that we do as a supplier vis-a-vis our customers has to go through the EZO meter. And if you want to know, yeah, we totally made that up. We're a research organization, remember? But it's a metaphor, but it's a really powerful metaphor for everything that we've seen in our data, which is everything that we do with our customers. We have to ask ourselves, are we truly making it easier for our customers to buy? Because right now, it's incredibly hard, and we're paying the price. Now, if you ask yourself, how would I do that? What are the tactics I might use to make it easier to buy? Well, we went out, we studied that. We, again, through a whole lot of research, worked with customer organizations and sales organizations. We actually surveyed customers around a whole range of attributes of how they interact with suppliers, the behaviors they saw suppliers engaging in. And then we ran a factor analysis on that. What we found is, effectively, from a customer's perspective, they see broadly two very distinct approaches that suppliers might use in selling to them. The first of those two approaches is over here on the left. And here's what customers told us they're seeing. They're seeing suppliers who really are out to solve multiple customer needs. To whatever you need, we're here for you. Got that need, we'll solve that too. To provide customers abundant information. So they say we work with suppliers. Every time we ask them for more information, they give us more information. They give it to us quickly. They offer customers lots of alternatives. They adapt the offering through the purchase. So if you need to do that, I think we can make that happen for you. And the other thing they found is that the suppliers will do everything they can, or supplier sales reps, to encourage customers to defer debate, to take those points of contention and just set them aside and focus on the things they agree on. We've got a name for this approach. We call this the responsive approach. For all the reasons we talked about earlier in the session, which is what you find is, in fact, this is a pretty predominant approach across sales organizations. It's let's do everything we can to bend over backwards and give our customers everything they're asking for, and to do it quickly and responsively. Now, in our research, we also found a very different approach. Over here on the right, we found actually suppliers doing something really different. So first of all, actually suppliers, rather than solving for multiple customer needs, presenting a clear and stable offering. This is our offering. This is what we do. This is how we can help. to give clear, concise rationale for those recommendations. Here's what we think right answer is. Here's what we think you should do next. Here's why we think it's the right answer based on this evidence. They're always perceived by these customers as being sort of one step ahead of the customer. They knew the problem we were going to run into before we even saw it coming. And they're able to explain different aspects of that deal very clearly. Here's what is the right thing to do here. Here's the information, the options that matter most, and here is why. And what's interesting is we also found these suppliers, rather than encouraging customers to defer debate, they encourage customers to address those debates, get those points of contention on the table, and figure out what those points of contention are, and make sure that we're actually reaching agreement so we can move forward. We have a name for this too. We call this not the responsive approach, but the prescriptive approach. Now, it's interesting, you look down both those lists, left and right, and think, well, they both look great. I'd like to do some of the stuff on the left. I'd like to do some of the stuff on the right. But notice how different they are. These two approaches are 180 degrees different from one another. On the left, the approach is really, whatever the customer wants, give it to them. The approach on the right is, I'm going to take you by the hand, and I'm going to guide you to the things that matter most. And I'm going to proactively tell you which things you really need to do. And why does this matter? Well, because what anything is in research, when you find two very different approaches like this, you can horse race them. That is, you can actually run them through data sets, and you can analyze them and put them side by side and see the impact that they have on different kinds of outcomes. So let's take our two approaches here and run them against purchase ease, the thing we care about. So the thing we got to solve for is, how do we make the purchase easier? And what we found is this: a prescriptive approach increases purchase ease by 86%, and a responsive approach actually works the opposite way. It doesn't actually make the purchase easier, it makes it harder. Now, this is a bit of a surprise for us. We had a hypothesis that we'd see something like that on the right, that a prescriptive approach would likely actually have this kind of impact, but we thought the bar on the left would also be big, just not as big. We didn't anticipate to go negative. Why does it go negative? Because stop and think about what we're solving for here. What we're solving for is making it easier for customers to buy. But if your primary posture in a world of overwhelmed customers is they're overwhelmed with information and they ask for more information, what do? Give them more information. All we're doing is we're throwing a log right on that fire and letting it burn even brighter. We're adding to the pain. And what we found, and the same thing, by the way, we found the same thing on purchase regret, except the bars work in the opposite direction because we're working on a negative here rather than a positive. So what happens is a responsive approach actually increases regret, and a prescriptive approach decreases it. This is what it means, by the way, when we talk about teach, tailor, take control. This is what take control is. To take control of the purchase, not just the part of the purchase that relates to you, but that entire purchase process. And think about what that looks like. See, here's a definition of prescription. You think about, what do we mean by prescription? When we think of prescription, we think about a credible and influential set of do this, don't do that recommendations provided to customers across the entire purchase process, deliberately intended to ease the customer's movement towards purchase. And think about it's a credible and influential set of do this, don't do that recommendations. These are binary. Based on, so in fact, one of the things I would tell you is, working with sales reps around the world, I've kind of boiled it down to one phrase. If you guys gave me your entire sales team and you locked us in a room for 30 seconds, said, Brent, you get 30 seconds, train them on one thing, I would train them on the following phrase. In working with other customers like you, one of the things that they've learned is, that is an incredibly powerful phrase. In working with other customers like you, one of the things that they've learned, or we have learned working with them, is because that allows you to offer credible, influential, do this, don't do that recommendations. Let me give you an example. In working with other customers like you, one of the things that we've learned working with them is procurement's going to get involved. And usually procurement gets involved pretty late. And when they get involved pretty late, they tend to blow things up, and it's really frustrating for everyone. One of the things that we would recommend is perhaps that you bring procurement in early. And by the way, when you bring them in early, they're going to have the following two questions. Here's how you answer those questions. Here's the one piece of information you need to answer that question. All that other information is just going to distract you. That's prescription. That's taking control of the purchase process. And what's so interesting is you can do this across all those dimensions. Remember, this is not awareness, consideration, preference, purchase. It's that entire purchase journey. You think across that entire purchase journey, there's so many opportunities to offer that level of prescription. But how many of us do this? You think down the bottom right, for example, deciding which supplier is best. I would imagine many of us provide do this, don't do that recommendations on which supplier is best. Yes, right? But what about in the middle, under solution? Deciding which information to consult. Rather than saying, oh, you need a white paper? I'll get it to you tomorrow. What if our response was, we get that request a lot, but one of the things we find in working with customers like you is that particular white paper can be a little distracting because it raises more questions than it answers, and if you share it with people, it can actually slow you down. What we would consider actually is, what we'd suggest is actually taking this one graph from that white paper and just using that. Here's some talking points. That's prescription. That's taking control. Look at deciding who to involve, on the far left, deciding who to involve and why. We can actually provide our customers with recommendations on who should be involved in the purchase. You know why? Because we know. We've seen customers wipe out again and again and again as they've tried to buy our stuff, but those customers are buying it for the very first time. They don't know. You know what you have that they don't? You have a map to the minefield. You know where those landmines are. What's to say you can't share that with your customers? So if Challenger and teaching is all about teaching your customers what to buy, Prescriptive is all about teaching your customers how to buy. And it's such an interesting opportunity for all of us, because if you go out and ask customers sort of, well, how's that happening right now? Is that how did the sellers, this is a survey question we asked, how did the sellers you interacted with, what did they do? What did the sellers you interacted with do to influence the decisions you made throughout your purchase? Effectively, how influential were the sellers that sold to you? What did they do to help you? And there was an open-ended question. We took all the answers, they're write-in answers, and we took and made a word cloud, and here's the word cloud that came out of that. The answer is nothing. From a customer's perspective right now, whether this is fair or not, we had huge debates all year long with CMOs or CSOs around the world about are they right? This is what customers think, this is what they're thinking. The sales reps right now that are selling to us are not providing that kind of help. And what's the one thing your customers need? Help. Take everything you're doing and run it through the ESO meter. That's how you take control of the customer conversation and guide them through the purchase. I'm so excited. So, by the way, the implications of this are huge, and we can help you with this through our memberships, through our solutions engagements. What it means is remapping your entire sales process into a buying process, figuring out how to verify where customers are on that, figuring out what are the landmines that are going to step on, figuring out the right ways to diffuse those mines. We've done a huge amount of work, even in the last 12 months with members, to do this, and it's so exciting to see what companies are doing with this. And we'd love to share that with you guys, too. But for now, my clock says I'm out of time. Did you guys enjoy that? Awesome. Thank you. Cheers, everybody.